We know that modifiers need not just be single words like adjectives and adverbs, and then modifiers can also be phrases. In this particular video, we are going to focus on how you have to use modifiers that are phrases, that are a collection of words. Mainly with regard to modifiers that are phrases, rules revolve around the placement of the modifier in the sentence. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Alright, what are the placement rules? There are two broad rules that govern the usage of modifiers in a sentence. The first of the rules, if you have a modifier, that modifier is a description for a particular word. Make sure that that word that the modifier is referencing is explicitly stated, that it is present in the sentence. Sometimes we leave things unsaid because even without saying it, people can understand what we are talking about. That is perfectly fine when there is context. Or when it's spoken communication, and with my gestures, with my body language, I'm able to communicate exactly what I mean. But in written English, when there's only one sentence and there is no context provided, it has to be stated explicitly. It's only when you state everything explicitly will any layman who's reading the sentence be able to understand what the point is that the sentence is trying to convey. So this is a common mistake that we make when we speak, and therefore we do not realize that that mistake is there in a particular sentence. We leave things unsaid, but that's incorrect. The word that the modifier is referring to should be explicitly stated in the sentence. Okay, so how do I check for this? The easiest way, whenever you're working with a modifier that is a phrase, we're going to discuss a bunch of rules, we're going to discuss a bunch of special circumstances. Always start by converting that modifier into a question. By converting the modifier into a question, you're making sure you understand the meaning that the modifier is trying to convey. And when you make sure you understand the meaning, you will also make sure that the reference is present in the sentence. Let's take an example. Desiring some recognition at work, a lot of time was invested in the project. Now at first glance, this looks like a complete sentence. There is meaning that is conveyed there. We want recognition at work and therefore a lot of time was invested in the project. It makes sense, right? So when we speak, we just leave it at this. But let's do our converting the modifier into a question check and see whether it's actually grammatically correct. First, start off by identifying the modifier. What's the modifier in the sentence? Desiring some recognition at work is our modifier. Alright, let's take this modifier and convert it into a question and see what the modifier is referring to. Alright, so that's our next step. Convert it into a question. Who or what is desiring this recognition at work? And when you ask that question and you check what is the answer to that question, you realize that who or what is desiring recognition at work is not given in the sentence. If it's not given in the sentence, then the modifier is just dangling there. That's why this error type is called dangling modifiers. You have a modifier, but the word that it's supposed to be describing, the word that it's supposed to be attaching itself to is actually not there in the sentence. So then how will you correct the sentence? You will have to introduce the person or the team in this sentence that's looking for the recognition. So you need to introduce the noun into the sentence in order to correct the sentence. A correct sentence would read something like this. When you say, desiring some recognition at work, Sandra invested a lot of time in the project. Now let's do our check. This is our modifier. Convert it into a question. Who or what is desiring recognition? My answer, Sandra, is present in the sentence. Right? So this is the first check. Whenever you have a modifier, convert it into a question and check whether the word that the modifier is referencing is physically present in the sentence. This is a fundamental rule when it comes to modifiers. Okay? Let's look at our next rule. The word just being physically present somewhere in the sentence is not good enough. Rule number 2, that word has to be present right next to the modifier. The word that the modifier is referencing and the modifier itself, the two should be physically touching each other. The modifier and the word should be right next to each other, right? Our checking process is the same. we're going to start by converting the modifier into a question, and we're going to ensure that the answer is present and that the answer is next to the modifier in the sentence. Let's take an example. Wanting to avoid plastic cups, the customers were supplied drinks in paper cups by the restaurant. Okay, so we'll be getting environmentally conscious, right? Let's do our checks, right? Let's identify the modifier in the sentence. Wanting to avoid plastic cups is a modifier in the sentence. Next step, convert the modifier into a question. Who or what is wanting to avoid plastic cups? Is there an answer in the sentence? Absolutely. What is the answer? The restaurant wants to avoid plastic cups. Right. But look at the sentence again. The modifier is at the beginning of the sentence. The word that the modifier is referencing is at the end of the sentence. The word is present, but the word is not next to the modifier. So this sentence is also grammatically incorrect. So what should you do? Correct the sentence by moving the words around such that the modifier is next to the word. So how will you correct this error? Wanting to avoid plastic cups, the restaurant supplied drinks to the customers in paper cups. Okay, so I have this modifier wanting to avoid plastic cups. Who or what is wanting to avoid plastic cups? The restaurant. So the modifier is next to the restaurant. So you do have a correct construction here. But wait a minute. Read the sentence again towards the tail end, little bit more carefully. Wanting to avoid plastic cups, the restaurant supplied drinks to the customers in paper cups. There's a slight difference in construction here from the original sentence. In paper cups is also a modifier in the sentence. So let's check whether in paper cups is being used correctly in the sentence. Convert into a question. Who or what is in paper cups? The drinks. But is the modifier next to the drinks? It's not. As it stands, the modifier is next to the word customers. So the meaning of this sentence actually is that the customers who were in paper cups were supplied drinks to by the restaurant. That's the actual meaning of this sentence. Look at the original sentence. This error was not there. It very clearly says drinks in paper cups. This is a correct usage. This is an incorrect usage. Now you might ask, obviously, the customers are not in paper cups. The drinks are in paper cups. That's understood. But what did we say earlier in this video? Leaving things to the understanding of the reader, making sure that any layman would understand the sentence in the same fashion is vital. You can't leave things to the understanding of the reader. There has to be no ambiguity in the sentence and the meaning that it's conveying. That's the very purpose of trying to place modifiers in the right place. You'll get a lot of these forwards, funny sentences, funny leave letters, and so on. A lot of those sentences are funny because of misplaced modifiers. We don't stop to think where we're putting these descriptions when we actually say them. Like one of my favorites is a sentence that says, it's a funny leave letter, and it says, I need 3 days leave to go to my hometown to sell my house along with my wife. Now think about that sentence. I need 3 days leave to go to my hometown to sell my house along with my wife. Sounds as if you're selling the house and you're selling the wife, which does not make any sense. What are you doing along with your wife? You're going to your hometown along with your wife to sell the house. That has to be the correct placement of that expression. So even if there is only one meaning that is logically possible, or you can't, even if there's only one meaning we will use in real life, you can't leave it to the understanding of the reader. You have to make sure that it's correctly placed. So this sentence has one modifier error. This modifier is in the wrong place. This sentence is another modifier error. This modifier is in the wrong place. So the actual correct construction will be something like this. Wanting to avoid plastic cups, modifier, convert into a question. Who or what is wanting to avoid plastic cups? The restaurant. So this modifier reference is correct. Supplied the customers drinks in paper cups. Who or what is in paper cups? The drinks. So this modifier construction is also perfectly fine. Dangling modifiers, misplaced modifiers. These are the most two common errors when it comes to the usage of modifiers, and you have to watch out for them. First, you make sure that the word that the modifier is referencing is there in the sentence. Being there in the sentence is not enough. It has to be there next to the modifier. These are the two fundamental checks. Do it every time you see a modifier in a sentence. Alright. I want to run through a couple of quick things. There can be more than one way to correct a sentence. So just because you decide this is the right order does not mean you will necessarily find it in your answer options. So you need to read all your answer options carefully, and when your modifiers are tested in a sentence, for each answer option, for each placement of the modifier, I would suggest that you convert the modifier into a question and make sure it's in the right place. Let me give you an example. At the age of 12, my parents decided to move to Singapore. What's your modifier? At the age of 12. Who or what is at the age of 12 is a logical question you would ask. Clearly not the parents, because they're not going to be parents at the age of 12. So you've said my parents, so you probably want to say that you were 12 years. So I was at the age of 12 is what you need to say in the sentence. And the I is missing in the sentence. Because what you have right after are the parents. Right. So this is a dangling modifier error. Who is aged 12 is now there in the sentence. So how will you correct it? Now, inserting the I into the sentence is what all of us would think of first. So you will say at the age of 12, I moved with my parents to Singapore. So now who or what is at the age of 12? I. The word I has been introduced, and it has been introduced right next to the modifier. So this is definitely a correct sentence. What if you didn't find this in your answer options? Or what if the second part of the sentence was not underlined at all and your base sentence has to be, my parents decided to move to Singapore, and only the first part was underlined? Then you need to come up with other ways of correcting the sentence, right? So you need to keep your mind open to other possibilities. So when I say something like this, when I was 12, my parents decided to move to Singapore, it's also perfectly fine. I've introduced the I within the modifier and I still have clarity. When did this happen? When did your parents decide to move? When I was 12. So you have a time reference given here. This sentence is perfectly fine as well. There's nothing wrong with it. How do I determine which of these two constructions will be the right usage? What if I'm given both these in my answer options? Don't worry about it. You're not going to be asked to take a relative call on whether you have to make the correction in the base sentence or whether you have to make a correction within the modifier. Later in the sentence, there will be some other error if they are giving you both these constructions. The point, there can be more than one way of placing and correcting modifiers, so you need to be open to the multiple possibilities that would exist across your answer options. Just because you've thought of this construction or because you thought of this construction doesn't mean you should go into the answer options looking for just that. Okay? One more thing. Let's take care of this sentence. Patrick took care of his family's every need, working tirelessly. What's your modifier? Working tirelessly. Who or what is working tirelessly? Patrick. So you clearly have a misplaced modifier error. Patrick is at the beginning of the sentence. Working tirelessly is at the end of the sentence. So working tirelessly and Patrick need to be placed next to each other. How can you correct it? You can correct it by putting the modifier after Patrick. Who or what is working tirelessly? Patrick. You can correct it by putting the modifier before Patrick. That's also perfectly fine. Working tirelessly, Patrick took care of his family's every need. Both these sentences are equally fine. Because what is our rule? The modifier has to be next to the word that it's describing. We have not said before or after. So either a direction is okay, and those are also multiple possibilities that you have to keep your eyes open for. The modifier can be before the noun, the modifier can be next to the noun. As long as it's physically around the noun, you're perfectly fine. Whether it's before or after does not really matter. Now, remember when we talked about adjectives, we said the adjective has to go only before the noun that it's referencing. So that's true for adjectives. Adjectives can't come right after the noun that they are referencing. But for modifier phrases, both before and after will work perfectly fine. And all of these options you need to keep your eyes open for. One last thing about how not to correct modifiers. Something you have to watch out for. A lot of times when people are correcting a dangling modifier error and inserting a word into the sentence, they will not necessarily insert next to the modifier and they will end up creating a misplaced modifier error. So this is important. This is something you have to watch out for. It's a very common tendency that people have, right? Here's an example. Born after the early 1980s, a concern for exercising and fitness is higher than among other generations. Okay, we've said than among other generations, which means we're talking about some generation. What generation? The generation that was born after the early 1980s, which is your modifier. Convert into a question, who was born after the early 1980s? Which modifier is it that we are talking about? Sorry, which word is it that we are talking about? Not there in the sentence. Okay, let's introduce that generation then. We have the modifier, born after the early 1980s, a concern for exercising and fitness is higher among millennials than among other generations. Now millennials is introduced. So dangling modifier error here. But that has been corrected here. The word is there in the sentence. But now I have a misplaced error because the word is not next to the modifier. That's why this is the correct construction. Born after the early 1980s, millennials have a greater concern for exercising and fitness than did other generations. So a lot of times if the original sentence is a dangling modifier error, you will realize there is a dangling modifier error, but in your effort to correct it, don't forget to make sure that you're also not creating any misplaced modifier errors. That is very important. Right? So these are all the things to watch out for. Keep your eyes open for multiple possibilities, multiple ways of correcting the sentence, and keep your eyes open simultaneously for both the dangling and the misplaced modifier errors. In your concern for one, don't forget about the other. Let's do a quick exercise. I'm going to give you a few sentences. I want you to identify whether the modifiers are correctly used in the sentences. You can pause the video at this stage, look at the 4 sentences if you want, and then we will continue with the explanations. Have you had a chance to look at the sentences? Let's discuss them. Kara saw 2 little kittens chasing after a full-grown dog on her way to work. Brave little kittens, right? But on her way to work is a modifier in the sentence. Who or what is on her way to work? We're trying to say Kara, but it's next to the dog. As it stands, the meaning of the sentence is that the dog was on a way to work and that while on the way to work, the dog was chased by 2 little kittens and Kara witnessed the whole thing. Clearly, the dog is not going to work. I don't think it's a police dog. So the correct construction has to be on her way to work, Kara saw 2 little kittens chasing after a full-grown dog. This is not the only correct construction. This is just one of them. You can also put the modifier after Kara and you can say Kara on her way to work saw 2 little kittens, etc. Right? I'm just giving you one possible way of correcting each of these sentences. But as we discussed, there are multiple possibilities that exist. Driving all day around the mountains, the village nestled in the valley was reached around midnight. So your modifier is driving all day around the mountains. Convert into a question, who or what was driving all day? You don't have that. So this is a dangling modifier error. The village was not doing the action of driving. The sentence is incorrect. So introduce the person who is driving. So one possible way to correct it would be to say driving all day around the mountains. We reached the village around midnight. Another modifier, by the way, is nestled in the valley. Who or what is nestled in the valley? The village. You should have checked for that in both your sentences. In both sentences, the modifier is next to the village, so that has not been a problem in either one of these 2 versions. But you should have kept your eyes open and looked for that as well. The salesman sold the air conditioner to the customer with the after-sales service contract. With the after-sales service contract is a modifier. As it stands, it's referring to the customer. Did we go around hunting for a customer who had a contract and then sell the air conditioner to him? Doesn't make sense. Who or what had the after-sales service contract? You're trying to refer to the air conditioner. The air conditioner that came with the service contract was sold to the customer. So misplaced modifier error, one way to correct it would be to say the salesman sold the air conditioner with the after-sales service contract to the customer. Alright, one last example. Elizabeth Blackwell became the first woman to receive a medical degree in 1849. In 1849 is a modifier. First glance, it looks fine. But I have ambiguity in the meaning that the sentence is conveying. I'm not sure whether she became the first woman ever in 1849 or whether she became the first woman out of all those to receive the degree in 1849. I don't know whether the 1849 is referencing the word became or whether it's referencing to receive, right? Which action are we denoting? Which event happened in 1849 is not very clear. So you want to put it at the beginning of the sentence. In 1849, Elizabeth Blackwell became the first woman to receive a medical degree. This particular sentence is not really talking about or referencing a noun, it's referencing the action of becoming. So it's not physically next to became. Why is it not physically next to? Is that okay? Verb modifiers, that's what we're going to be talking about next.